We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish.
To you a great
Talk show host Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be able to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television. Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on his late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night TV.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope once again on late night TV.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien is looking to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night TV.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late night television.
Conan O'Brien may be preparing to push the late night envelope. We've got it. God bless our media.
We got to get an envelope.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people think the big news stories today are the snowstorm that's hit the Midwest and looming federal budget cuts. But judging by local news, there's apparently an even bigger story that's sweeping the nation right now. Check it out.
Well, if you filled up your gas tank lately, then you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
And you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
So you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
Well, you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
But you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are on the rise. I know.
Some people are following the selection process very closely, but most people aren't following it at all. So we thought it would be fun to go out onto Hollywood Boulevard to ask people what they think of the new Pope. Keep in mind, we do not have a new Pope, so none of these people could possibly have anything to say about him. But here is tonight's edition of Live Witness News.
What do you think about the new Pope?
New Pope, he's doing an awesome job. I think he's like somewhere in his like mid-70s. He's a really cool guy. I really would love to go to Italy and meet him.
What do you think about the new Pope?
Oh, I think the new Pope is amazing. He's from New York. I think it's great that he's our new Pope, and I think Pope Benedict XVI did a wonderful job as well.
Where were you when you found out about him?
Actually, I was on Facebook. One of my church friends posted about it on Facebook.
Did you see the interview with the Pope's ex-wife?
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
Well, she was hilarious. She was funny.
Does it bother you that he's Jewish?
I don't know. It's fine, I guess, because you know, I don't think a pope should stay one religion. Probably be any religion. So.
Why do you think they chose a teenage pope?
I guess they want a new change. Maybe have the teenagers to get into the religion as well, since now, like preteens and teens are not into it. Maybe a new trend they're doing.
What's his name?
Pope. The new Pope.
Pope the new Pope.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to tell the new Pope?
Well, I just like to tell him you're doing an amazing job. I think it'll be great, and go you.
Even Gorbanifar knew that you were supporting the Contras.
Yes, he did. Izvestia knew it. The name had been in the papers in Moscow. It had been all over Danny Ortega's newscast. Radio Havana was broadcasting it. It was in every newspaper in the land.
All our enemies knew it, and you wanted to conceal it from the United States Congress.
We wanted to be able to deny a covert operation.
Ladies and gentlemen, the handcuff necklace is missing. I repeat, the necklace is MIA. Sometime yesterday, Nancy lost the necklace. I spoke with Nancy just a short time ago about this trying time in her life. Nancy Grace, first of all, I want to express my condolences.
That's a dandy. That is a walleye. It's a 10-pounder. I love to do that.
Why Kate? And if not Kate, I think I get why. If not Kate, then who else ranks on your celebrity crushes?
So is serious reporting hard to come by these days? To take a look at the state of the Fourth Estate, author Chris Hedges joins us now to discuss. Hi Chris, nice to see you there. So I want to start off by reading a quote from one of your articles. It's on Truthdig on this very topic. You say, quote, "The celebrity trolls who currently reign on commercial television, who bill themselves as liberal or conservative, read from the same corporate script. They spin the same court gossip. They ignore what the corporate state wants ignored, and they champion what the corporate state wants championed. They do not challenge or acknowledge the structures of corporate power." So, Chris, what do you think is the biggest problem with the media today?
Well, that sort of sums it up. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the corporate state. You have a half dozen corporations, Viacom, General Electric, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, Disney, Clear Channel, that control almost everything most Americans watch or listen to. And, you know, as I wrote in that column, the lie of omission is still a lie. They hold up political puppets, you know, as part of this kind of charade that to deflect attention from where power actually resides. We don't hear anything about the assault against civil liberties, whether that's the Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, warrantless wiretapping, the use of the Espionage Act to shut down whistleblowers, the misuse of the 2001 authorization to use Military Force Act as through giving the executive branch the power to assassinate American citizens. And climate change, we should have, given the crisis that is now confronting the ecosystem on which the human species depends for its existence, we should have climate scientists on every night. And none of that appears because it's all driven by celebrity gossip and trivia, but it's all the same tawdry, useless garbage.
Now, what do you think drives these editorial decisions? I know you just pointed out some very important stories there. Why do you think there isn't more airtime dedicated to these kinds of issues?
Well, because we've lost control of our media. Look, General Electric's made a fortune off of these wars, as has Microsoft, and they're hardly going to allow a dissident voice to impede their profits or their ratings. And that's really, at this point, what it's all about. These television personalities, people like Chris Matthews, who was a cheerleader for the war on MSNBC, makes about $5 million a year. They're celebrities. They're judged on their likability, what in the business is called a Q score, not on their commitment to news or to the truth.
Chris, when do you think that this happened? Can you pinpoint an area in time or a point in time where this shift happened, or has it been something that's been gradual?
I would argue that at this point, commercial networks don't even do news. But if we had to point at a particular moment and when this process was accelerated, it would be Clinton's decision to deregulate the FCC. And that, of course, allowed these corporations to buy up. I think Clear Channel owns about 1,500 stations in the United States. And that was a kind of consolidation into a very small number of corporate hands and diminish the capacity for alternative forms of information and independent forms of information to reach the American public. It is about informing the public. And when news becomes a business, when news becomes about entertainment, then issues that are not uplifting, so to speak, issues that don't have an immediate emotional draw, whether it's around sex, whether it's around violence, whether it's around anything else, are shoved to the side. And you're reduced to essentially what we have been reduced to, which is kind of carnival act.
Argentina, two priests have come forward to clear the new pope's name in the country's so-called dirty war. In Argentina, two priests have come forward to clear the new pope's name in the country's so-called dirty war. time when tens of thousands of people disappeared under the country's military dictatorship.
Bad years. Now, hours after being elected, Pope Francis was actually accused of turning his back on two Jesuit priests who ended up in prison. Rafael Roma has spoken to two other priests who say that the then Reverend Bergoglio
You're despicable.
actually helped them avoid being captured.
Jorge Bergoglio testifying before authorities in Argentina.
Me reuní 2 veces con el comandante de la Marina en ese momento.
The then Buenos Aires Cardinal, who would become Pope Francis, said in 2010 hearings that he demanded the liberation of 2 fellow Jesuit priests.
Yo di testimonio de que no estaban en nada raro esos padres.
I testified, Bergoglio said, that they were not involved in anything weird. The Jesuits had been detained by the military dictatorship that ruled Argentina from 1976 to 1983. The period known as the Dirty War saw the disappearance of as many as 30,000 people in Argentina. Pope Francis was accused in a book written by an Argentine journalist of deliberately failing to protect 2 Jesuit priests kidnapped by the military when Bergoglio was the leader of the order in his country.
A what? No, actually CNN. He is accused of being an accomplice to the fascist coup that overthrew the democratically elected government and replaced it with a Nazi-fascist regime backed by the Vatican and the Bush CIA. The 2 priests simply surfaced his involvement in the murder and torture of Argentine citizens as part of the Vatican's inquisition in the country. But of course, CNN's purpose here is not to actually report any news about this. It is to deceive American citizens into thinking this former Nazi coup coordinator is really just a wonderful man. Despite the murder and torture of thousands of Argentinians that he was directly involved with.
But 2 other Jesuit priests say Bergoglio protected them and gave them advice on how to elude authorities.
Si alguien les busca, fíjense quiénes son. He would tell us that if somebody came looking for us, to find out first if they were people we knew. If not, he would say, don't even get close. He even told us where to hide in case authorities came looking for us.
During the Dirty War, the dictatorship targeted priests. Jesuits who lived among the poor were especially vulnerable. One priest says Bergoglio, as leader of the Jesuits in Argentina, gave him secret advice on how to stay safe.
He told us that we could count on him and that we were not alone. He gave us advice like not using the main staircase, but the elevator instead, and avoid strangers. He told us where to hide if there were strangers and to let him know as soon as possible. He was undoubtedly worried about us.
Rafael Romo's joining us, and we were actually asking all the questions during the break here. This is fascinating. But tell us what his role was, Bergoglio. It looked like it was kind of a practical thing that he was managing at the time.
It is true, and there are conflicting reports. Two priests who said he didn't help him. Two other priests who said he, in fact, was helping them. And I think what's emerging here is a very pragmatic figure of then Cardinal Bergoglio, who knew that if he was too much in the face of military authorities, he was going to end up being killed by the regime. What he chose to do was to play this role as walking a very gray area in which he made sure that he remained alive, because at the end of the day he was not going to be able to do anything if he ended up a martyr.
What kind of game do you think you're playing? Worshiping the Father of lies and claiming I am gonna save you just because you called me Lord Jesus Christ. Will you worship the Father of hell? You worship the devil in my stead. You worship Roman Apollo, and he's the one that's gonna have to save you when you're dead.
And he could easily have ended up that way.
There was not a lot of room for error. There was not a lot of tolerance between 1976 and 1983.
So he's doing this balancing act. Do we know what happened to the other two priests that St. Bergoglio did him no favors?
One died in the 90s, and one is still alive, living in a monastery in Germany. And he has said since that there was some misunderstanding as to what the role of Bergoglio was back then, and that he later, his understanding was that he was actually helping them behind the scenes.
Right,
Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, 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 Argentina.
So why Kate? And if not Kate, I get why. If not Kate, then who else ranks on your celebrity crushes?
Ladies and gentlemen, the handcuff necklace is missing. I repeat, the necklace is MIA. Sometime yesterday, Nancy lost the necklace. I spoke with Nancy just a short time ago about this trying time in her life. Nancy Grace, first of all, I want to express my condolences.
That's a dandy. That is a walleye. It's a 10-pounder. I love to do that.
Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago on August 10th, on August 9th, excuse me, had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934. Show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place. I have in my possession testimony from the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in November of 1934 by one of the fascist plotters that they were going to follow Hitler's model exactly and impose martial law on the United States, round up unemployed people that were worthless to the economy and troublemakers and Jews and put them into internment camps. And their plan was, if necessary, to exterminate the people that could not be part of the effort. The only reason the coup attempt in 1934 didn't succeed is that they hired the wrong general to lead it, General Smedley Butler, the great Marine hero, two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who worked with the plotters just long enough to be able to identify who they were and then blew the whistle on them to Congress.
First, Mike Thompson begins a paper chase that takes him into the dark heart of fascism in the America of the 1930s as Document investigates the White House coup.
On the 21st of November 1934, the following rather chilling article appeared in the New York Times. It concerns the discovery of a planned coup that could have altered the course of American history. Yet today, hardly anyone knows anything about it.
A plan of Wall Street interests to overthrow President Roosevelt and establish a fascist dictatorship backed by a private army of 500,000 ex-soldiers and others appeared before the House of Representatives Committee on Un-American Activity.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
A congressional committee ultimately found evidence of a plot to overthrow Roosevelt. According to Butler, the conspiracy included representatives of some of America's top corporations, including J.P. Morgan, DuPont, and Goodyear Tire.
Torture and calls for justice against those who use it have never been far from the headlines since George Bush declared his war on terror in 2001. Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay are now names synonymous with torture. Britain is also facing allegations that its intelligence agencies were present at torture sessions or condoned its use against terror suspects abroad. The so-called war on terror was used as a partial justification by the former US administration for the use of torture. But George Bush wasn't the first president to use that phrase. Over 30 years ago, General Jorge Rafael Videla, leader of the 1976 coup in Argentina, employed the term to justify a 5-year dirty war against opponents of his military junta. Torture was routinely practiced during this dark chapter in the country's history.
Between 1478 and 1833, thousands of people were arrested, tortured and executed because their religious beliefs were not welcome in their homeland. They were victims of the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition has cast a long shadow these dark days of the Catholic Church. The Spanish Inquisition is remembered as the first and possibly the most terrifying example of the thought police. It was established to rid Spain of heretics. The Inquisition itself was a roving religious court that sought out and punished crimes against God and the Catholic Church, in the process cleansing Spain of its religious and cultural diversity. It recruited thousands of anonymous informants and shrouded its methods in a cloak of secrecy. Records from the time reveal the atmosphere of fear it generated.
Everyone shudders at its very name, as it has supreme authority over property, life, honor, and even the souls of men.
At the heart of the Inquisition's work was the interrogation. A prisoner would be grilled for hours on end. These ancient and sinister methods have lived on, aped in the modern world by oppressive political and religious regimes, from the Gestapo to the KGB. If an interrogation didn't produce an adequate explanation, the Inquisitor might call upon the services of the most feared servant of the Spanish Inquisition, the torturer. Actual torture techniques were many and various, from simple flogging to more elaborate and imaginative methods.
Now, in talking of, quote, a tale of unspeakable evil in Honduras, we find that Inez Murillo is a Honduran woman who survived torture in the hands of Honduran government death squads. Her account was corroborated by one of her interrogators in an extraordinary story published in Sunday's New York Times magazine. The story they told these New York Times magazine. The story they told has the United States and the Central Intelligence Agency up to its neck in unspeakable evil. Florencio Caballero, who participated in torturing Murillo while she was held in a secret jail in 1983, says that he was trained in Texas by the CIA. He says he was part of an Army death squad that was responsible for the torture and slaying of about 120 Honduran and other Latin American citizens, and for the slaying of an American priest. Here are your tax dollars at work. Now that's quotes from the Washington Post. The story goes on to talk about corroborating this account by the reporter, a man named Lemoyne, and his account of the CIA involvement in Honduran government's brutal secret offensive against leftist dissidents. Continuing the story and taking quotes, Caballero says he was one of 25 people organized in a new Army intelligence unit in 1979 and sent to Texas for 6 months of training with a U.S. Army captain and CIA instructors.
The following information has been reproduced from www.antipasministries.com. Its author, a Christian and Vietnam military vet, posted the material as a letter of protest and public warning against activities being sponsored, financed and conducted in foreign countries by the Republican religious right here in America. Quote, killing for the joy of it is wrong, but killing because it is necessary to fight against an antichrist system is not only right, but the duty of every Christian. These are the words from Cubby Ward's Paralive Ministries newsletter, Living Word. Paralive Ministries is associated with Larry Lee in its work in Central America, specifically, in El Salvador. Both Ward and Lee say they have dedicated the work of their ministry to, quote, God's redemptive purpose in Central America. End quote. Texas megachurch pastor Larry Lee graduated from Dallas Baptist University in 1972, where he met his first wife Melba, and also attended the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. He also served as Dean of Theological and Spiritual Affairs at Oral Roberts University. His Texas megachurch has 11,000 members with 4 other spin-off churches in the area. He has been and still is an influential leader in the religious right political movement in the United States. But his quote ministry in Latin America, as is others from the Republican religious right, are sponsoring the most bizarre, morally reprehensible, and unethical behavior ever seen in history, done in the name of Christ. Evangelical pastor Clemente Diaz Aguilar was detained by government forces in Guatemala and tortured by mistake. He explained his ordeal, quote, My captors stole everything from me. Those who captured me divided up my money, and later they led me into the hands of the torturers. In the long hours of torture, they asked me constantly about other pastors of some churches in the capital. They asked me also about my views on liberation theology. The torturers, tired of doing so much damage to me, rested for a while. Then I recognized some of them. 2 are members of a singing duo from these churches, Verbo and Mission Elam churches. I begged them to recognize me because I recognized them. Then they asked me questions about my capture, my complete name, my address, my church and my activities. When they realized I was not the person they were looking for, they begged my forgiveness, saying, Brother, we are also Christians. End quote. In December 1981, Dr. Myrna Cunningham in the Mosquito Indian border area between Honduras and Nicaragua was captured by Concha forces, elements of the same Concha forces supported by Pat Robertson, Tim LaHaye and Larry Lee, and was beaten and repeatedly raped. Dr. Cunningham described the bizarre rape scene during which the mosquitoes were singing hymns and praying. The Contras who had been involved in the rape later reported that they had been told by their pastors that killing and even torture when necessary to obtain vital information were permissible in a just war against an antichrist system, and, if in the heat of the moment excesses like rape should occur, well, that certainly wasn't good, but that if they later confessed their sins, God would forgive and understand. After all, the purpose for which they were fighting was just. In July 1982, the Nicaraguan village of San Francisco del Norte, on the western border with Honduras, was attacked by a band of 80 to 100 Contras. 15 village members were massacred, some even had their hearts cut out while they were still alive, and dozens more were kidnapped and tortured. While all this was going on, the killers and torturers were praising God, speaking in tongues and singing hymns. Asked to explain the participation of some of their members in these atrocities, one pastor answered, They don't massacre people. They massacre demons, and these people are demon-possessed. They're communists. These are right-wing death squads supported and sponsored by the Republican religious right here in America. A frightening glimpse into this kind of thinking was revealed in an extraordinary article, How Argentina Won Its War Against Leftist Terrorism, which appeared in the February 13, 1982 edition of the conservative magazine Human Events. The writers, both conservatives, former Chicago Sun-Times correspondent Virginia Pruitt and former New York Times reporter William R. Mazzella, interviewed members of the Junta and conservative business and church leaders who had supported the right-wing death squads. One business leader praised those who had run the death squads as dedicated Christians. Another was quoted as follows, Don't say it was I who said so, but the victory over the left began the day my wife said, There's no way out except to kill these monsters, we've got to kill them all. A New York Times correspondent, Raymond Bonner, unearthed the surrealistic details of the use of torture, or as Dick Cheney called it, enhanced interrogation techniques, taught by American CIA instructors and executed by right-wing death squads. It was described by a Latin American trainee. Quote, One evening they went and got 9 young people that were accused of being guerrillas and brought them to where we were. The first one they brought, a young fellow who was around 15 or 16 years, and the first thing they did was to stick the bayonets under his fingernails and pull them out. That day he was the first one that died under torture. The young fellow said all sorts of things against the guerrillas in order to be let go. The interrogators said, We are going to teach you how to mutilate and how to teach a lesson to these guerrillas. The officers who were teaching this were Americans. They didn't speak Spanish, so they spoke English, and then another officer translated it into Spanish for us. Then they began to torture this young fellow. They took out their knives and stuck them under his fingernails. After they took his fingernails off, then they broke his elbows. Afterwards they gouged out his eyes. Then they took their bayonets and made all sorts of slices in his skin all around his chest, arms and legs. They then took his hair off and the skin of his scalp. When they saw there was nothing left to do with him, they threw gasoline on him and burned him. The next day his dead body wasn't around but was found by people out in the streets, left as a warning. The next day they started the same thing with the 13-year-old girl. They did more or less the same, but they did other things to her, too. First, she was utilized, that is raped. The Americans didn't rape her, but the soldiers did. They stripped her and threw her in a small room. They went in one by one. Afterwards they took her out tied and blindfolded. Then they began the same mutilating, pulling her fingernails out and cutting off her fingers, breaking her arms, gouging out her eyes, and all they did to the other fellow. They cut her legs and stuck an iron rod into her womb. The last one that they killed that day suffered more, because they stripped him naked at midday. Then they put him on this hot tin and made him lie there. He was cooking. After about a half hour, when they finally took him off, he was all covered with blister-like wounds. They did different types of torture to him. Then they threw him out alive at 14,000 feet altitude from a helicopter. He was alive and tied. End quote.
seen buildings completely destroyed like this before, but only when done intentionally. Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten, zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dat heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Let's compare. Explosives are used to demolish buildings like this in just seconds. Okay, so it's a controlled demolition. What's the problem with that? Well, it happened on the afternoon of 9/11 at the World Trade Center. Let's just think about this. Controlled demolitions cannot be engineered and rigged in a day. It takes months. And therefore, this event must have been planned in advance.
Keep your eye on that building as they coming down.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department, and they did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
And these people heard explosions.
We heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shockwave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out. The building followed after that.
He takes his hand off, and you hear 3, 2, 1, and it was boom, 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 boom.
And these reporters recognized it as a controlled demolition.
And I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. It looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
So what's the problem if this was a planned demolition? Well, we are told by government agencies that this building came down as a result of normal office fires. The National Institute of Standards and Technology produced their final report in 2008.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
Well, what do you think brought down the building?
And what caught my eye is more than 1,300 architects and engineers examine the evidence about Building 7's collapse and disagree with the official report issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I certainly am much more open-minded about it than I was, and it is because of the involvement of the 9/11 families and all these engineers and architects.
You are about to hear from architect of 23 years, Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now there are more than 1,500 architects and engineers who say that it could not have been brought down by office fires. They are backed by 9/11 family members. We're calling for an independent, unbiased investigation.
I'm Richard Gage. Fires have never before caused the collapse of any skyscraper, even though there are numerous examples of much hotter, larger, and longer-lasting fires in these buildings. And in the case of Building 7, the fire that NIST said started the collapse had actually burned out over an hour before. It could not have caused the collapse, as NIST claims. Yet this 47-story, modern steel-framed skyscraper, which was not hit by an airplane, collapses mostly into its own footprint like a house of cards, as fast as a bowling ball falling off the side of the building, in just under 7 seconds. Listen to the experts.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet.
which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories, and going from motionless to free fall instantly, that's a bothersome part of the puzzle because NIST never explained it.
We've got a building that came down in its own footprint, so all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time in order for that structure to fall the way that we saw.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
The whole building completely comes down in one continuous motion. There couldn't have been any structural resistance.
According to NIST, the failure occurred at column 79 on level 12. They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
Impossibility?
Yes.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
I'd like to know why NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel. Why is this forensic evidence not being included in the report?
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel. And yet we have evidence of molten iron. R.J. Lee Company, USGS, and Dr. Stephen Jones's work, all three separately found these microspheres.
In the dust, we found what we characterize as unreacted thermitic material in the shape of some very tiny red-gray chips, which have different properties, and in the reaction they produce molten iron, which is the prime indication of a thermitic reaction, and such a reaction can be used to destroy steel structures. What we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples that needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
I've independently seen thermitic activity within 2 separate independent samples of World Trade Center dust. My contention, based on finding thermite residue in the dust, is that it happened before. It didn't happen after in the fires that ensued in the rubble pile afterwards. All the characteristics of the microspheres tell me that thermite was involved in melting those steel beams.
So thermite, if it was present at the World Trade Center and created this molten metal that so many witnesses and photographic evidence shows, would also explain the fact that the fires could not be put out at Ground Zero.
The only thing that is consistent with all of the evidence that we have that could cause such a thing is the use of thermite to cut through the steel.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry. Yeah. Like lava.
Volcano. Well, the manual gets into thermite, and if it says if you have melted steel or concrete, which we had on 9/11, we should test for it.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
We're asking for an investigation that follows national standards. There's no excuse to not test for this. If terrorists use explosives in '93, why didn't we test for them? If all these witnesses heard explosions, why aren't we testing for them?
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
So the preconceived notion of NIST is that there's no evidence for explosives, and so there's no point in looking. that is the most unscientific thing that you can possibly think of, not to look because you don't expect to find evidence, and in fact the evidence is overwhelming. They state these conclusions for which there's virtually no evidence, and then they ignore conclusions that can be drawn from the evidence.
The Freedom of Information Act request to NIST was denied with the claim that releasing this data might jeopardize public safety. How could it possibly jeopardize public safety?
The destruction of evidence was a criminal act in itself. It was already being carted away and destroyed when the FEMA investigators got there about a month after September 11th.
You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
The scientific forensic evidence, ignored by NIST, but carefully reviewed by teams of technical professionals, corroborates the hypothesis of explosive controlled demolition. We traveled to 21 foreign countries and 32 American cities, bringing this evidence to the attention of the public. And we're backed by 9/11 family members and other concerned citizens who are calling for an independent, unbiased investigation.
I'm a family member trying to find out the answers to the murder of 3,000 plus people. The bottom line is that it needs to be investigated properly.
Please look at architects and engineers. People all around the world, scientists all around the world are questioning this. And there's some deep, deep explaining to do.
It took some kind of consciousness raising on my part before I was willing to look at the possibilities. And really, you need to go where the evidence leads.
As an engineer, I have 3 degrees in engineering. I signed that petition for architects and engineers for 9/11 truth some time ago because the American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
Look at the evidence. In fact, I'll say this very categorically. Any reasonable person who looks at the evidence that's been brought forward has got to come away with the feeling that something has to be done, a real investigation has to be done.
We will never heal. This country will never, ever, ever forget that day. We have to demand a new investigation. I want justice here.
The country owns this. We're all victims. You all should want answers. It's not just ours, not just mine. We all know something that
It's distressing for everyone to come to terms with this evidence. But we must pursue the truth wherever it leads. Look at the evidence and decide for yourself.
September 11th, September 11th, September 11th, September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th. September 11th, September 11th, September 11th. September 11th, September 11th. September 11th, September 11th, September 11th, 2001.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam.
Saddam, 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 Saddam. War and danger.
Continuing danger.
Hour of danger. Very, very dangerous world. A grave new threat. Horrific acts of atrocities. Murderous regimes dedicating to killing us.
Tyranny and terror.
Slaughtered thousands. Weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons programs.
The deadliest of weapons.
Terrible weapons. Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons. Poison gas.
Torture chambers. Mass graves.
Deadly technologies.
Radical ideology of hate.
Terror of threats.
Terror. 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 War on terrorism. War against terrorism. Global war on terror. Global terrorism. Global terrorism. Global terrorism. Global terrorism. Global terrorism. Global terrorism. Global terrorism.
global terrorism, 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 terrorism. Evil terrorists, 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 terrorism, terrorists, 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 global terrorism, global terrorism, global terrorism, global terrorism, 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 terrorism. Evil terrorists, 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 global terrorism, global terrorism, global terrorism, global terrorism, global terrorism.